All right, well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Fiber Broadband Association's Five for Breakfast. We're now in our 29th episode of 2024. Before we kick off, I'd like to thank Wesco, the platinum sponsor of Five for Breakfast. Last week, the Fiber Broadband Association held its DC fly-in with about 35 of our member companies in attendance. We broke into three teams and hit all the key congressional offices as we worked to ensure that every American has access to fiber broadband. Yesterday, NTI approved the Volume 2 BEAD proposal for Hawaii, adding it to the 18 states and territories that now have their initial proposals approved. That leaves 38 states and territories left to go. So Assistant Secretary Alan Davidson from NTI will be addressing the fiber industry at Fiber Connect 2024 in Nashville on Monday, July 29th. We look forward to getting an update on the progress of the BEAD program. Speaking of Nashville, we're just a little over a week away from our annual Fiber Connect 2024 conference, July 28th to 31st. Yesterday, our registrations for Fiber Connect actually surpassed our previous record from last year. And so we're on pace for about 5,000 attendees this year. It is going to be epic, and you don't want to miss that. So if you haven't registered, please do so ASAP. After Fiber Connect in Nashville, we're going to be in Des Moines in September, Calgary in October, and Albuquerque in November. So please join us in one of those regional events. That brings us to today's Five for Breakfast session. Our guest is our good friend, Bryan Darr from Ookla, who's going to be discussing comparing delivered versus perceived network performance. Before I formally introduce today's guest, I'd like to introduce David Norris from our team, who's going to walk us through some housekeeping items.
Thank you very much, Gary, and good morning to everybody who has joined us today. We appreciate it. Before I go over a few logistics, we'd like to once again thank our platinum sponsor of Fiber for Breakfast, Wesco. Now, if everyone would keep in mind, all participants are in listen-only mode today. To ask a question, please type it into the question box. You can find that tool in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. And we will be having a question and answer session with our panelists today. So please do type your questions in there. This presentation is also being recorded. It will be available on the FFB website within 24 to 48 hours, and you can find that recording in the Events tab under the Fiber for Breakfast drop-down option. And finally, at the conclusion of today's presentation, you'll be prompted to take a brief feedback survey. Please take a moment to do so. We do appreciate your input. And with that, I will pass things back over to Gary to once again introduce our panelists and get things started. Gary?
Well, thanks, David. Good morning. I'm Gary Bolton, the President and CEO of the Fiber Broadband Association. Last week on Five for Breakfast, our guest was Tyler Cooper, the editor-in-chief of Broadband Now, who discussed the digital divide, municipal broadband's shifting role. So Tyler identified 16 states that still have major restrictions on municipal broadband projects, making it challenging for munis in those states to participate in the NTI BEAD program. The good news is a number of the states, such as Minnesota, have eliminated state legislation preventing or limiting municipalities from offering broadband services. Also, even in states with restrictive legislation, such as Tennessee, municipal electric companies such as EPB have thrived, providing over $2.7 billion of economic development benefits from deploying fiber in Chattanooga. Today on Five for Breakfast, our guest is our good friend Bryan Darr from Ookla, who will be discussing comparing delivered versus perceived network performance. Bryan is the Vice President of Government Affairs at Ookla, spearheading the company's programs for federal, state, and local governments. He also leads Ookla's advocacy efforts with lawmakers and policy organizations promoting the value of crowdsourced intelligence to help with better data-driven decisions. Bryan has spent most of his professional life in the wireless industry, beginning his career in cellular as a sales representative for Cellular One in Memphis in 1985. After discovering his customers were having difficulty traveling with their phones, he founded Mosaic in 1988, originally branded American Roamer, and began developing consumer roaming guides. Soon, Mosaic was researching and designing mobile operators' coverage maps, enabling them to inform customers about the footprint of their mobile networks. In June of 2018, Mosaic was acquired by Ookla, combining with the vast speed test network performance data with mapping and coverage expertise of Mosaic. So with that, welcome, Bryan. And for our audience, please type in your questions as we go and we'll work those into discussions. With that, I will turn it over to Bryan.
Gary, thank you so much for having me back again. I always enjoy our conversations. And I very much look forward to seeing you in Nashville in what, 10, 11 days? It should be great. Um, yeah, we wanted to talk a little bit about, this morning about the differences between what people perceive when they take a speed test and what's actually being delivered to the service address. This is a topic that has come up for years, and as all of this funding has become available, and as states have worked hard, and the federal government has worked hard to figure out where broadband does and does not exist, this has become a much more important question, right? We've got a great deal of data on what people are experiencing when they take a speed test, and for those, I think most people are familiar with it, but you can take a speed test right in a number of different ways. We've got a mobile application. It all started really, by taking one, through your web browser many years ago, and that's still available. We have desktop applications, but people take tests both on fixed and mobile networks, and more people are that last connection to the device that they're using is wireless. Now, it may be the wireless networks, but very commonly, in fact, most of the time, it's actually a Wi-Fi connection from their laptop or their tablet or their mobile phone through the Wi-Fi connection in their house. And what they see and experience there is real in terms of the performance that they're going to have where they are on the device that they are with the total network connection that exists. But that network connection is the first part of it, of course, is from the ISP directly to the service address through, the various aspects uh, of their network. But then from that point, what happens inside the home can vary significantly. And it's one of the reasons why we report so many different metrics associated with speed tests. It's not just about average test. It's not just about as in mean average or median, which has become a very important metric. But we also report on, the best tests and the worst tests that people are experiencing, because this is all critical to understanding, what that consumer perception is. As these new fiber networks are getting rolled out, the level of service, the level of throughput, and the latencies being provided, and the way those numbers are falling, is really, bringing a whole new level of capability to these homes and businesses. But that doesn't mean that people can necessarily experience it. And so the Wi-Fi devices that most people have in their house that they've ordered from Best Buy or Amazon or bought at Walmart or Target or some other big box store, these older devices, many of them aren't capable of actually handling the throughput speeds that's now being delivered, particularly with new fiber connections. It's really even true with many of the other types of connections that people have, but particularly true with fiber, as you have gig speed capabilities that are being rolled out in market after market, and some markets are offering speeds even higher than that. We're seeing commonly now, 2 gig speeds in some areas. And so if you've got an old Wi-Fi router in the home, people simply, they can sign up for the service, but they're not necessarily going to experience it. And I think it's also very important that as service providers go out and start offering these speeds, that they make sure that their customer premises equipment is up to date and is capable of providing that, but also to communicate to the customer how important it is that whatever else that they have put inside of their home to extend that network to the devices that they use every day needs to be upgraded for them to have the full experience that they're now paying for. So, many of your members, most of your members, Gary, are well underway with upgrading their networks. Many of your members, have a fiber network as the new network or the only network they've put in. We have seen a lot of existing players, longtime telecom companies that as they upgrade their networks, they're seeing, we're seeing that roll out, as new geographies, as new communities are being connected. I've got a few slides I want to share with the audience here that I think can help explain, really what I'm talking about. And if you'll give me just a moment here, I'm going to share my screen. Here we are. Hopefully everybody can see that. By the way, there is in the image that you see on your screen, in the upper right-hand corner, there's an icon. If you click on that icon, then it should expand it if it appears too small for you. But this is what ISPs are delivering and how they prefer to measure the speeds that they're delivering. And so to the client gateway, actually in the home, they have that direct connection, of course, that they completely own and control. The ISP, many ISPs also have a speed test server actually embedded in their network. And so this is going to provide really the best measurement available of what can be delivered to the service address. Not all ISPs have their own speed test server, even though thousands of them around the world do. But we do have our speed test server network, over 1,500 servers scattered across the United States, and it's about 16,000 globally, where people are always reasonably close to a server, minimal number of connections necessary in order to be able to reach one. And so this is still provides a very good representation of what's being delivered to the home. If you have devices in the home that are then connected via Ethernet, let's say, to the client gateway, such as a set-top box or a Wi-Fi router, then again, this is also going to provide high throughput capabilities. The concerns start to come in as far as what the consumer is actually experiencing when you start pushing out to subscriber equipment. If it's wired, it's still going to provide a very good connection, but can be impacted by other things that are going on the device. But more and more people are really connecting wirelessly to that connection in their home, and that those Wi-Fi connections can be impacted by, as I said before, the age of the Wi-Fi router, the distance from the router, other interference factors in the home, walls, and so forth. So I wanted to give people a little bit of an insight here into a new data set that we're rolling out right now. We're actually embedded, the speed test software is embedded in millions and millions of devices that are actually in people's homes today. We've never really surfaced this data set before, but as the broadband labels have now been required by the FCC of all of the larger operators, and will be required by all operators, large or small, come October, we realize that we've got a data set that can ultimately help validate the claims that are being required of the operators on their broadband labels. Although there's a lot more value to this than just validating those claims. But this is an overall view of just 1 week's worth of data across the United States. And you can see the peaks here where clearly we've got, fiber level speeds, out here on downloads. We've got fewer of those speeds actually being seen in the uploads because there are companies that can provide very high download speeds, but not very high upload speeds. Those typically are going to fall into the cable category, but you can see that in the wireless category and satellite as well. But this is the sort of spread that we're seeing in terms of what people are, what is actually being measured at or near the gateways. This is not consumer initiated testing data. These are tests that are actually being captured from devices, from companies, from these devices made by companies like Netgear, Plume, Linksys, and so forth. There's a lot of OEM devices where speed test is actually embedded. Wanted to provide an example of one operator that has been historically delivering services via copper. Frontier has been very busy getting their network their new fiber capabilities rolled out and the whole network upgraded. And you can see that reflected here as we look at a national view of the tests that we're seeing being captured on Frontier. And this is very up to date. This is last week's data that we've captured here. And so you can see that we've got really adoption levels that we're seeing here at the mid level, near the gig speed level, but we also see where people are choosing lower plans, but there is still a not insignificant number of areas that have not been upgraded. And I'm going to show you an example of that. Illinois is an area where there's still quite a bit of work to do for them. And so we're starting to see some higher speeds here, but it's a very small number. Most of Illinois is still reflecting speeds below 100 megabits per second on the download, and really even in the below 5 megabits per second on the upload. But here's an example of where they have started building this out in Illinois, and which is causing the spikes, the smaller spikes that we're seeing, in the between 800 megabits and a gig. So here are the average download speeds, which is going to take into account the varying tiers that people have subscribed to. We're going to see north of 500 on the download speed. So very impressive there, just as an average. And your latency, here at 7.6 milliseconds. But when we look here at another area, this is rural, this is outside of Peoria, then we've got speeds still, averaging a little under 15 megabits per second and a little under 2 megabits per second for the upload. But this is an area that I'm sure they have slated, in the near term, to get upgraded. Another view here. This is actually from Virgin Media in Ireland, but you can see how this breaks out at time of day and how your throughput speeds, in the middle of the day, actually can be higher because there's less load on the network, and in the evening hours you start to see, the impact of a lot more congestion on the network. Still very good speeds, largely for a significant number of customers, but fewer speeds that are in that 1.5 to even 2 gig level. And then wanted to also show an example of how a cable company would look relative to the plans that they offer, as well as the difference you're going to see in download speeds here. Back in March is when I captured these speeds from Charter Spectrum in the Tampa St. Petersburg area. And we're seeing that they had 300, 500, and 1 gig plans available at that time. But you can see spikes in this data that match up very clearly with their plans at 300, 500, and a gig. We're actually seeing kind of a cluster of tests down below a gig, just a little bit below and a little bit above. But we're seeing spikes of the number of tests here, a little over 500, a little over 300, where they have slightly over provisioned the network. But here on the download side is where we see a huge difference between what you're going to see on the cables from a cable provider versus what you can see from a fiber provider. The upload speeds have improved and are now, we're seeing more that have gone into the 40 and 45 megabits per second area, but very little above that. Very few speeds that are actually even above 100 megabits per second. And then just another quick example here. Verizon has both very well known for their wireless network, but they also have a very significant fiber footprint. And you can see the sorts of results here on the fiber side, where we're seeing spikes up here in the 900 and above range, also in 500, 300. That aligns very clearly, with the types of tiers that they offer. But you look at the wireless services in the areas where that's been adopted. The rural areas has less fiber, fixed wireless access being offered. But we're seeing, slower speeds here on the upload. And although, certainly well into the broadband range, as the FCC defines it, of 100 down, but not nearly the type of speeds that you would see on fiber. So I'm curious if we've got any questions from you, Gary, or from our audience at this point.
Well, Bryan, I always love all the Ookla data because I just love seeing trends and where things are heading. So you mentioned Frontier as one of your examples. So they were actually one of the companies on our DC fly-in last week, and they reported to Congress that while they're a mid-sized regional operator, they've actually deployed more fiber than any company in the U.S. except for AT&T, which surprised me. I knew that they've been killing it on fiber deployment, and they've really done a great job. They're, always top of the NPS scores and things like that. But so it sounds like it's really great news for, that Illinois will soon have fiber, and everybody will be seeing, fiber speeds in those
Yeah,
areas.
and clearly from that national view, I mean, the amount of work that Frontier has done and the amount of time that they've done it is really quite astonishing, and the data bears that out. Yes, it does show areas where they haven't gotten to, but clearly at the pace that they're operating, I wouldn't expect it's going to take too much longer for these final few communities that they serve to see a significant upgrade in their network experience.
Well, I mean, congratulations to Frontier and just all the success they have and continued success. So, can you mention you didn't mention Starlink. In our discussions, you were saying that Starlink looks great when they launch a satellite, but not so good a few months later. What's going on with that?
Well, they launch waves of satellites, and I think there's going to be some leveling out of this. But what we have historically seen is that they put a big new group of satellites up. The speeds jump, fairly significantly, and then as they sell more um, uh, subscribers on the service, then that will impact the capacity on the network, and we start to see it sliding down a little bit, and then they launch a new group of satellites, and it starts pushing the speeds up again. Relative to historical satellite service, Starlink is an amazing difference. But we're not seeing the kinds of speeds that we do certainly on fiber networks. For people in extraordinarily remote areas that are a long way away from getting fiber or perhaps may never get fiber, these are really good. It can be a really good option, and certainly as a backup system, it's being adopted, for those reasons as well. And for remote areas of the world, that could be many many years, and for oceanic uh, crossings, cruise ships, and so forth. It's bringing amazing new capabilities for these types of things. But it's for people who need very very fast throughput speeds. In the gig level, we're not seeing those kinds of capabilities yet, and not I really don't know when or if we will.
So, like saying is any home that you can pull electricity to, you should have fiber, and everybody else can get Starlink. But so hopefully we'll be able to get fiber to everybody that we can get electricity to. One of the questions that came in is saying, hey, is it a fair statement to say the average home user doesn't understand that, say, if you have a half a gig service, that includes the overhead and control data, which takes up 10 to 20% of the total bandwidth seen. So they're looking at not really what their throughput is, but what all the overhead and everything on that connection.
Yeah, it's look, all of there's, as I mentioned, there's a variety of different things that are going to impact what the consumer sees. What I think, though, is critically important to everyone is that customer perception of the network is going to play a very, very large role in their satisfaction with your service. Regardless of what you are delivering to the address. And so, and because the consumer will continue to use that wireless, that Wi-Fi capability, for the last few feet. There's all this talk about last mile, but we shouldn't forget about the last few yards, and because that is going to impact that. If they've bought a gig level service for you or a half gig service from you, and all they're experiencing is, 230 down, 250 down, they're going to ask themselves why they're paying for that. And I think it's extraordinarily important that the ISPs educate their consumers. First and foremost, make sure that their customer premise equipment is up to date and capable of delivering those speeds. But beyond that, that they educate their consumers, their subscribers. If you're going to buy this service, we also advise that you upgrade your Wi-Fi router if you have a separate router in your house, if you have boosters in your house. Some of these mesh systems that are now becoming so popular by policy are going to restrict the amount of bandwidth that each individual extender is going to be able to supply, because you don't want one user to suck up all the bandwidth in the house. It's the same thing at a hotel. The hotel's got, a huge pipe coming into it. But what you might experience as a guest at the hotel is 15 megabits, 20 megabits. They don't want an individual guest to impact an entire floor or the whole hotel by giving them access to the full bandwidth. And so these are important considerations and an important part of the education of the consumer to make sure that they understand why they should be buying higher speeds and why what they're experiencing in the home is different, but it's also because it can be spread out to make sure that all of the devices have got significant throughput available to them. There are more and more, there are just more and more devices in the home that are using an internet connection.
Another question for the audience is that they said they have cable broadband and the service is unreliable, intermittent outages frequently occur, like even 10 minutes or so. Is there any metric that captures unreliability?
It's difficult to measure what's not there. It is something we are looking at very hard here at Ookla and how to better understand. Now, consistency, we have the ability to do that now because we can see when there are slowdowns in the networks. But if the network simply disappears, people can't take a speed test on our platform or any other platform when it just disappears. But we are looking at ways to do that better in the future, and hopefully we'll be able to cover that on a future podcast, Gary.
So one of our audience members from the government in Texas is asking, how do they access data from Ookla?
Well, please reach out. I can give you my email address, and I can connect you with the folks that handle your area. We've got sales reps around the country that specialize in different types of clientele, and happy to connect you with that. You can reach me at Bryan.Darr, Bryan.Darr @Ookla.com.
Well, Bryan, I could talk to you all day. I love talking about data and Ookla data, especially. I really appreciate everything you guys are doing to really help us measure not only performance in our home networks, but also looking across the globe to see how competitive the U.S. is getting, or hopefully getting. But so thanks again, Bryan. I can't wait to see you in a week, I guess, down in Nashville. And I want to thank
Looking
everybody
forward.
for joining us today. We're going to get back together next Wednesday with Shepard Mullins and David Thomas from Richter and Hampton LLC, who's going to be discussing how to avoid some of the pitfalls with the NTI BEAD programs. You're not going to want to miss that. So we look forward to seeing you guys next Wednesday. I want to see everybody in Nashville on July 28th to 31st. It is going to be beyond epic. Can't wait. And thanks again, Bryan. You're always one of my favorite guests.
Thank you, Gary.